Hi, my name's Thomas Barrar, and I'm a queer indie game dev based out of Christchurch in New Zealand. I'm a sort of newcomer, I guess, to the interactive industry. I've probably been working on games and game adjacent things for about 2 and a bit years, give or take. And I come from a background of actually sort of graphic design, e-commerce and marketing. And sort of prior to that, I studied fine arts. So I sort of found my way into interactive in a kind of roundabout manner. um, my focus in terms of the works that I create is on making sort of validating, interesting, engaging LGBTQIA plus content. Particularly interested in storylines that explore queerness through like trans and non-binary narratives and coming of age stories. I work with a team of 4 people, I guess, so pretty small, and most of us work on game dev kind of part-time, so we're really emerging, I guess, into the industry. And because we're indie, we all sort of wear a lot of hats, but my main focus is sort of, I guess, graphics and art and storytelling, like visual storytelling. I'm particularly interested in pixel art and low poly 3D, so I really like to use those kind of retro frameworks to tell these kind of, I guess, modern queer stories. And I'm really interested in that because, I mean, firstly, it's just an aesthetic that I like, but secondly, I think there's sort of an interesting anachronism between like these sort of retro old school games telling kind of like modern diverse storylines. So I feel like that's kind of a fun tension. Yeah, and I do with our main project, which is called SHEFLIFE. We're making a game that's sort of like a old school narrative focused role-playing game that centers around a non-binary character who's sort of just left home and is heading into art school. So there's a lot of semi-autobiographical elements there, and we collaborate a lot with people in our community, especially with an organization called Inside Out, who are based in Wellington. And Inside Out's like a charity organization that works with LGBTQIA plus young people in New Zealand, and they sort of will do consultations and they'll do workshops with schools and businesses and libraries and things like that. I think for me, I suppose I grew up on a lot of like sort of like Super Nintendo, like kind of old school pixel games. And a lot of these games were like narrative heavy, like lots of text and really strong sort of interpersonal storylines, lots of emotion and relationships. I guess I'm talking about like your Final Fantasies and things like that. So I really enjoy like storylines in interactive that have that like humanity to them, and I'm like so interested in sort of the interactive medium of storytelling. But I mean that I think is inspiring in the sense that I was like, oh, these are so cool when I was younger, but I didn't really see a lot of, I guess, like diversity in those games that were coming out in like, I don't know, from like 95 to 2002, I guess, when I was sort of growing up. I didn't really see, there weren't really a lot of like queer characters in those games or queer themes at all, even though there's like heaps of romance and sort of like interaction between all of these characters, and they have all these deep inner worlds. I mean, they're quite monolithic and predominantly, I guess, they're quite sort of Western influenced, and maybe like their casts were quite sort of, I don't know, shallow in that sense. So I suppose I'm a little bit inspired by wanting to not rewrite history exactly, but kind of try and inject some of myself into those games that I was really interested in. Because I suppose for a long time I didn't really see myself portrayed in games. I didn't really feel like, I think if you don't see yourself in the medium, you don't necessarily think, oh, I can work in this industry, right? So visibility is really important. And I guess a little bit of visibility goes a long way as far as inspiration goes as well. I wrote down a note here that I thought was interesting about inspiration, because I remember the first time I was able to play, I guess, as a queer character was in around 2009, 2010, with a game called Dragon Age Origins. And it wasn't until like 3 or 4 years later that same-sex marriage was even like legal in New Zealand. And that, so I just thought it was kind of interesting that I was able to sort of like, I don't know, see myself reflected in the games world before I even felt maybe validated and accepted by maybe Kiwi society or something. It's sort of interesting. I guess it's an example of how games and interactive can kind of, I mean, not, you know, influence society necessarily, but there's you can be part of a conversation and you can sort of like help take healthy steps towards things like acceptance and inclusivity. So yeah, I think seeing that really reignited my interest in games, and that was during the time that I was at university. So I did make a couple of little kind of weird games at uni, which was really fun, but I hadn't really hit my stride until I sort of graduated and went and did a bunch of other things, and then kind of came back around to it and was like, oh yeah, you know, more and more of these indie games are coming up. These are really cool. Really inspired by seeing like Undertale take off. I thought it was really exciting to see a lot of LGBTQIA plus Twine games being made, like sort of narrative games. I like all of Anna Anthropy's works, which are like super queer and super trans and really exciting. In terms of like what I'm just inspired by, like right now, I'm so stoked about Umurangi Generation. You know, seeing games that have been made in New Zealand that are super like diverse and like punchy and cool and have all these like cultural elements to it. I guess Umurangi Generation kind of has an Australian component to it as far as where the developers based, but it's set in sort of post-apocalyptic Tauranga, and it has like so many like Aotearoa motifs in it. So I find that just like, oh, so good.
That's right. For our global audience, Aotearoa is the official kind of native name for New Zealand.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
I think the main thing I would have told myself is like, don't be so scared to, you know, jump in there and just start making stuff. I think I was so afraid that it would be too hard, that like games are really inaccessible. I think maybe there's there's like a barrier to entry where people don't fully grasp how easy it is to just jump in and start making stuff with some of the tools that are available now. I mean, you might not be jumping in and making a AAA hyper realistic VR game, but there's so much value to sitting down and making like a narrative story game, or making like a branching path text-based game, something simple like a visual novel. I mean, obviously they can be somewhat complex, but there's certain frameworks you can use to kind of do the heavy lifting for you if you're sort of like, you're passionate, you want to tell a story, you want to just get in there. I wish that I'd pushed a little bit harder at art school to make content that reflected my identity, I guess, and my queerness, and explored my own sort of thoughts and feelings around that, because I was quite easily discouraged away from doing it. And I guess I'm a little bit to blame, and maybe I wasn't encouraged by my faculty as much as I could have been either. So I suppose there's like two components to that. I think I feel like for myself, when I'm given opportunities to mentor or tutor other people, I'm always thinking how to not discourage people from exploring these kinds of things. I know that within the art school I went to, there were other students who felt kind of put off about talking through their artwork, I guess, communicating about their like culture or their identity or their like gender identity, their sexuality, things like that. And I think, you know, that's really rough. It's really sad. So I guess if you're young and coming up and want to make works that explore who you are and how you feel about yourself and where you come from and what you have to say to the world, you should just absolutely go for it and don't let, you know, people with bad attitudes discourage you from doing it.